Tethren has been one of Soulframe's strongest packs since it was introduced in Preludes 9, and despite a few nerfs in Preludes 13, it is still extremely powerful. In this video, I'm going to show you how Tethren's Arcanics work and create some Tethren builds. Tethren is the starting pack for Courage, but if you didn't choose it when you started Soulframe, you no longer need to swap to Kith of Kings in order to get it. Now you can buy both of the starting packs you didn't choose from your starting faction shop for 12,500 standing each once you reach rank 3. This is a wonderful improvement for new players, especially now that you can earn standing through favors in addition to faction tails. Tethren's 3 Arcanics are Fellust, Call of the Ancients, and Clash. Remember, your packed Arcanics get stronger as you level up your pact, so if you haven't gotten Tethren to level 30 yet, your Arcanics won't be at full strength. Let's start with Fellust, the Courage ability. Casting Fellust will grant your weapon a number of charges that scales with your Courage. There's no duration or time limit for using those charges, but you will need to think about charge economy. Fellust seems to have a minimum of 5 charges and a maximum of 7, although it's impossible to know for sure if that's a hard cap or if there's non-linear scaling and that's just the maximum we can get with the number of virtue points currently available. When you cast Fellust, the Arcanic icon stays full, showing that you have all charges available. As each charge is consumed, the color in the Fellust icon depletes, and when all charges are gone, the Arcanic goes on cooldown. Every time you successfully hit an enemy while Fellust is active, it applies a stacking damage buff to your envoy. It's important to note that this is a character buff, not a weapon buff. If you cast Fellust with your main weapon equipped, you can't swap to your sidearm to save charges, but you will get the damage buff on both weapons. So, how does this damage buff work? My current theory is that it's calculated relative to your weapon damage and then stacks additively, but because Fellust buffs your weapon damage, which then figures into each calculation, the more stacks you have, the stronger they are. There are too many variables for me to be entirely certain on this, and there could be some kind of multiplier here instead, but the bottom line for gameplay is that you want to get as many buff stacks as possible when you're using Fellust. So, how do we maximize our stacks? While Fellust is active, a basic attack will consume 1 charge and apply 1 stack of the buff. A missed attack will consume 2 charges and will not apply the buff. A melee heavy attack will consume 1 charge, but a fully charged heavy attack consumes 3. Both apply the buff if they hit. A melee throw consumes 2 charges, and a riposte consumes 1 charge even if its animation has more than 1 attack in it, but only applies 1 stack of the buff. Orbiting flyblades consume 3 charges and will apply the buff if they hit a target. Blocked attacks used to consume charges without applying a buff, but now Fellust seems to cause all attacks to bypass blocks, so you no longer need to worry about that in melee combat. This is a really good change, especially for new players. Arrow Hail does not seem to consume any charges, but it also doesn't benefit from the full buff. It does get some damage, but very little. I suspect this is intentional because a Fellust buffed Arrow Hail would be way too strong. Finishers, however, are clearly bugged, as they do not consume charges and do benefit from the damage buff. Attacks that consume multiple charges, like melee throws and orbiting flyblades, still benefit from the damage buff even if you only have 1 charge left. But if you don't have enough charges for a fully charged melee heavy attack, it will consume all remaining charges and you won't get the extra damage. We'll talk about how runes and totems interact with Fellust when we get to builds. For now, the bottom line is that you want to be smart about how you use your charges to get the biggest damage buff possible. Fortunately, Tethren's other Arcanics are a lot less complicated. Call of the Ancients is Tethren's spirit ability, and it provides a taunt, an armor buff, and a damage buff. The armor buff might scale with your spirit, but if it does, it scales poorly. It was very hard to test this because we can't see numbers for either damage taken or damage reduction. The taunt from Call of the Ancients will not alert unalerted enemies, but it probably should, because Greatsword sneak attacks buffed by Fellust in Call of the Ancients can get a bit silly. The strength of the damage buff from Call of the Ancients does scale pretty well, so having some spirit on a Tethren build is definitely worthwhile. Clash is Tethren's Grace ability, and it both buffs your stability and deals stagger to enemies around you. Again, it's hard to tell if the stability buff scales, but if so, it's not very impressive. The amount of stagger dealt does scale, so this can be a nice perk if you need grace on your build for some reason. Tethren's unique pact upgrades are Conqueror and Last Stand. Conqueror gives you a nice bit of health regain every time you kill an enemy. It does not seem to be affected by healer, but it's still worth using. Last Stand increases your melee attack speed when your health drops below 45%. This increase is quite significant. It's very fun to play with, but also impossible to sustain as you'll have at least one upgrade in Conqueror, giving you some healing with each kill. Still, it's a very handy boost when things get dicey. I should mention that the Preludes 13 patch note said packed passives can now be affected by virtues, but I don't know which virtues affect which passives or what impact they have. There's already so much going on with virtue scaling that it doesn't strike me as a priority, so I'm not sure what DE's intent was here. Perhaps if we had more information on how it works, we could engage with it better, but for now all I can say is that it exists. Alright, let's get into some builds. For our beginner build, we're going to stick with starting gear and 30 pact upgrades, which is the maximum you can get without Wyld Tethren. Of course, we're going to max out Sympathy for a strong heal over time whenever we pull a smite, max out Mora's Pride for more damage from Fellust, and max Conqueror for passive healing on kills. From here, I like to put 3 upgrades in Last Stand, and then max out Healer for better heals from potions, but that's admittedly because I'm not very good at melee combat. If you're more confident in your melee skills, you could put some points in Iridis's favor instead for more damage from Call of the Ancients, Voided for a damage buff after you pull Smite, or even Last Stand if you really like those attack speed buffs at low health. Wylder is the long blade you'll start with, and the totems you want to equip on it are the Lithe for increased smite chance, the Resolute for armor strip when you attack, and the Hewn for armor strip when you parry, which does stack with armor strip from beaver totems in your attack slots. For your sidearm, Nettle is fine to start with, but you'll want to get Pricklies as soon as you can. Fragments drop from several sources, or you can buy one from the Kith of Kings faction shop. You want Pricklies even though it's attuned to Grace because Flyblades are a much better companion for Longblades. Pricklies has no virtue requirement, so you'll still get some damage scaling from it even if it's not much, and most importantly, you'll get Smite procs and armor strip from the Orbit. You can upgrade to Skilter later on if you want, but you're mostly going to use your sidearm for armor strip and smite proc, so it doesn't matter that much which flyblades you use. For totems, you'll want to put the Messenger in your utility slot for increased smite chance, the Clever in your defense slot for more armor, and the Tireless or the Clever in your attack slot. The armor strips from the Tireless in your flyblades and the Resolute in your longblades will not stack, so you really only need one or the other. The Resolute is a rare totem, so it will cost more to upgrade, but it also has a stronger strip. I'd recommend going for that one if you can, because then you can put the Clever in your attack slot on your flyblades, giving you some extra damage in group fights. You do not want to put the Rascal on your longblade, because damage procs from the Rascal will consume Fellust charges without giving you the damage buff. Since orbiting your flyblades consumes 3 charges, you're not going to want to do that while you're stacking anyway. If you orbit your blades first and then cast Fellust, the orbiting blades will not consume charges and will not contribute to stacking the damage buff, so you might as well get the extra damage from the Rat Totem. The combat arts to prioritize with Tethren are pretty similar across all melee weapons. You want to max out Smitten for smite chance, and then the extra smite from Riposte and Vaunt is also helpful. Swift Parry makes parry timing a lot easier without needing to use totems, and Unyielding lets you parry heavy attacks. Fellust synergizes very well with Riposte, so this whole branch is worth maxing out on Longblades, and you'll want to get as many of these upgrades as you can on other melee weapons as well. Using Tethren as a beginner is a lot easier than it used to be. You don't need to worry about blocks anymore, and the new UI improvements help you keep track of your Fellust charges. Keep Call of the Ancients up as much as possible for extra damage and armor, and if you get surrounded by enemies, Clash can help you out with a bit of CC and stability. Once you get the Everflame rune, your damage will get even better. This is a pretty common drop from Sieges, so that's going to be the easiest way to get it, but it also drops from the Nell Knight and the Reaper. Activating the rune will give you extra flame damage, and Fellust will boost both the attack damage and the burn procs. Now let's get into some mid and endgame builds. Your first upgrades from the beginner courage build should be the Mora's Beast Prism, which you can get from the Kith of Kings faction shop at rank 2, the Triune Talisman and the Circade armor set, both of which come from the Crypt of the Circade, and Solos 1, a long blade that drops very frequently from many sources. These are all solid upgrades that are easy to get, and remember that a courage potion can help you get 10 more points to meet virtue requirements. You only have to buy each recipe once, and you brew them with Verminia. If you want to try a different courage weapon, you could use Orin Umber for a sword and shield build, especially since Durglint's damage buff will stack with Fellust, or try Needle's Eye for a greatsword build. Greatsword is especially fun this patch because its attack animations were significantly sped up. It feels so much better, so if you tried it in Preludes 12 and weren't a fan, it's worth testing out again now. Use Everflame as your rune, and for totems use the Logger and the Mercurial in attack, the Bulwark in defense, and the Mercurial in utility. Any full Courage Tethren build will be quite successful all the way to endgame. Using the Morris Beast Prism, the Molten Mora Talisman, and the Mendicant Armor set, you'll have so much health and armor and deal so much damage with your Fellust that you can just stand in the fray and hack away at your foes. Or you could do a Courage Spirit split build. This uses the Nidopaladine Prism, the Triune Talisman, the Mendicant Armor set, the best Flyblades you've got, and Gathanin. If you don't have Gathanin yet, Ducalic is also quite good here. We want Torchturnal as our rune, both for the extra fire damage and the buffed burn procs, and we'll use the Nimble in our utility for smite and again an attack for attack speed. We'll put the Toiling in our second attack slot for armor strip and the Carver in defense for even more armor strip. This build turns your polearm into a flaming lance of death. The longer attack animations just aren't an issue with all of your extra armor and stability, and once your rune procs, enemies die so fast it feels like popping balloons. Melee combat is alive and well in Preludes 13. But, of course, I am who I am and I like what I like, so we've got to finish this video with a Wyld Avex build. Avex is our brand new Ode bow that drops from the organ, and it has some unique mechanics. It has a melee attack instead of arrow hail, and its fully charged shots will pierce through one target and hit a second. This last part makes stacking Fellust with charged shots pretty tricky because if you don't hit 2 targets, it counts the potential second hit as a miss and you lose 2 charges without getting a damage buff. That said, I think this is a fair trade-off because if you hit both targets, you get both stacks, and if you hit 2 targets with a fully stacked damage buff, you get the extra damage on both hits. Fellust is a lot of fun on bow because it rewards patience and aim while punishing mindless arrow spam, so let's build our Avex to make the most of it. For our rune, we're going to use Alka's Breath for 3 reasons. First, Torrent is so strong it just isn't very fun for me. This is purely subjective, so if you like using Torrent, go ahead. Have fun with whatever you like. Personally, I enjoy the challenge of hitting shots, so Alka's Breath is just more fun. The second reason we want Alka's Breath on Avex is that the new melee attack will not trigger torrents, but it does get the damage buff from both Fellust and Alka's Breath. These arrow stabs are super fun and the animations are awesome. The final reason we want Alka's Breath on Avex is that it gives us 2 utility slots for totems. Avex doesn't have arrow hail, so we can't use hail to proc smite, but that's okay because the smite chance buff from the yielding finally works! Now we can use both the yielding and the spry in utility and get a very solid smite chance on our single target bow builds. In defense, I like to use the Noble because Avex is going to require a lot of careful aiming, so I really want to avoid being interrupted. In attack, the spry is almost mandatory. Avex has an extremely slow charge rate. I suspect this was meant to balance its piercing charge shot, which is fine in theory, but this is way too much. Arrow Hail does a ton of damage and requires none of the precision of lining up charged shots with Avex. The charge rate is currently so low that putting Gildor Joinery on Avex feels completely out of the question, and I will still want the Spry in attack on top of the Quicksilver bonus. This means we're losing out on damage potential from other attack totems, and if Avex had damage stats and virtue requirements roughly equivalent to other bows, I could see this being a fair trade, but as is, you need 30 virtue points just to meet the requirements for a bow with base damage equal to the Starling with its virtue requirement of 10. This bow feels like it came pre-nerfed. But it's better than Blitzel, so it's the best bow we've got for a Tethren build. Using Wyld Tethren lets us max out all of our pact upgrades, so if your Envoy rank is 17 or higher, you can equip the Bloomin' Bodkin Talisman to just barely hit the 14 Grace requirement with the Morris Beast Prism, even if you didn't choose Grace during Orngal's Fable like I did. We're still going to use the Mendicant Armor set, and Thrice Burns is the obvious choice for a sidearm, using the same totems we used for Precles and Skilter. Whirlwind is the better choice for a rune, because you can still proc lightning strikes while the blades are orbiting. For bow combat arts, our priorities are Wolf's Eye for smite on charged shots, Ready Mark for faster charges, and Riposte and Vaunt to enhance our bow melee. You can block with a bow using the same input you use to block with a melee weapon. Parry and Riposte also work the same way, and Avex's special melee attack uses the heavy attack keybind that is Arrow Hail for other bows. If you want to kick up your damage even further, you can drink both a Courage Potion and a Grace Potion and still not hit the damage cap for your charge shots. I don't think you're supposed to be able to use more than one Virtue Potion at a time. You couldn't in earlier Preludes, so this could be a bug, which is why I made my Tethren builds without potion buffs, but you should be able to use at least one potion to meet requirements or boost damage. This is a very fun build that can deal extremely satisfying damage, even without relying on Grace multipliers like just about everything else in Preludes 13. but I don't think it's so strong that it warrants a virtue requirement of almost 50% higher than that for purity. Future Sarah here. P13 Hotfix 6 brought a fix for Avex's previously backwards arrows, but the grip on the bow is still conspicuously high. Many folks have pointed out that Avex is not drawn like a real compound bow, where only one string is pulled back, and honestly, this doesn't bother me too much because I can imagine that Ode Tech just works differently, and somehow this makes sense for their world. But the bend in the strings is clearly not intended. I think the idea was to have our envoy's finger go through this little loop, but that would actually make aiming a bow much more difficult. Here's me practicing with my bow. Notice how I don't actually grip the riser, and what holds the bow to my hand is a loose sling, not a hard loop. That said, Avex's loops make lovely decorations, so hopefully a future hotfix will have our grip move down on both bow and string, which would beautifully balance out this excellent design. Avex would be so fun to use with Orangol since it eliminates the problem of Pack Hunter Wolves blocking shots, but putting Courage in Orangol is just not very good right now, plus Pack Hunter Wolves really shouldn't block shots anyway. But it would also be a great bow to use in co-op. In fact, perhaps we'll see another Avex build on another pact for exactly that reason. But for now, we can enjoy some meticulously prepared, incredibly impractical, but delightfully strong headshots from Fellust, Call of the Ancients, and a well-timed rune. If you found this video helpful, please help it out with a like and subscribe to see more Preludes 13 pack builds. What's your favorite weapon to use with Tethren? Let me know in the comments. And until next time, happy hunting!